They'll vote in a Liberal government and vote out four-time Premier Richard Hatfield. At latest count, the Liberals are sitting a comfortable 40% ahead of the Tories.
Like clockwork, Hatfield has always called elections 4 years into his term, and always in October. This time he's waited 5 years, right until the last days of his mandate. The critics say it's because he's running scared. Hatfield maintains he's always proved the critics wrong, and as Leslie McKinnon reports, whatever his chances, Hatfield has proved he's not a quitter.
But of course I know what you're trying to do. I mean, you are trying to write my obituary, and many people have written it before. So, I mean, I have a lot of confidence that, I mean, in the kind of, those people who rush in and rush out of this province and jump to conclusions being wrong, a lot of confidence in them being wrong.
Richard Bennett Hatfield, Tory Premier of New Brunswick for 17 years. But in this election, a party insider says there isn't a safe Tory seat in the province, including Hatfield's own in Carleton. And the Premier, who says he loves campaigning, sometimes seems disinterested. He plans his own campaigns and says he likes to stay away from television studios during elections. In fact, he pokes fun at the idea of being media conscious.
I just got a note telling me to fix my collar, and what's wrong with it? One part sticking out. Okay. Got to be careful of the image.
But he does care about the image. He hasn't driven a car much in 15 years, but he ordered this machine for a sod turning in Saint Antoine. And it's not a false picture. Hatfield fought for French and Anglophone rights. The provincial economy was 3% higher last year, and the province's credit rating went up a notch. Yet one pollster said Hatfield could best fight this election by hiding away somewhere.
Voila! I didn't lift very much dirt.
In this election, political analysts say he's the biggest liability.
It's taken a clear understanding.
He doesn't seem to be aware of this in the TV commercials that he's chosen to star in. The message is the Premier is the best reason to return the government for the 5th time.
Express your belief in New Brunswick. Re-elect the Hatfield government.
His confidence may come from the warm reception he often gets. But people liking him doesn't mean that they'll vote for him. And the evidence is strong that voters are tired of the image they see as Disco Dick, the free-spending jet-setter in a have-not province. It's been the best summer in years in New Brunswick. And as the season turns to fall with its harvest fairs and its ploughing matches, there is only one issue in this autumn election the Tories have called. It's a referendum on Richard Hatfield. First elected in 1961, Hatfield has said that politics is the only job that he's ever wanted. He became leader of the Conservative Party and in 1970 Premier, defeating the 10-year-old government of Louis Robichaud. Over the years, he developed an almost uncanny ability to overcome crisis. There was his scheme to build the Brickland sports car that went bankrupt, costing the province millions. There were proven charges of kickbacks and corruption in his own party. But through it all, he won election after election. He seemed unbeatable.
Trust the people of this province, and I think they returned that trust.
For years, Richard Hatfield confounded every Liberal leader that came along to challenge him. His reputation became mythical, a cat with 9 lives and then some. Reporters and political observers who swore that he'd resign over whatever scandal or controversy were forced to eat their words again and again. But then, in 1985, a series of events occurred that showed that the traditional tolerance of New Brunswickers was beginning to change. The previous fall, marijuana had been found in the Premier's suitcase. What added to the shame was that the drugs had been placed in the Queen's airplane. Hatfield was charged, but acquitted. Then, the final straw. A young Fredericton man told a tale about a drug party with students at the Premier's house. The story was never proven, but it did irreparable damage. After a lot of pressure for an explanation, the Premier released a statement admitting that he'd met the young men, but he adamantly denied there were any drugs.
Are they lying, Mr. Hatfield? Did the students lie? Whatsoever to me.
To this day, he will not talk about the trial or the allegations.
Well, the people of the province know that I was acquitted. I've commented on that. I've just dealt with that, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Again, it's something that you keep and the Liberal Party in New Brunswick keeps bringing up over and over again, but I'm not going to deal with him because I was acquitted.
2 years ago, despite a movement in his own party to unseat him, he triumphed again. But an erosion had set in. All the mistakes of the past were catching up. And now, in 1987, for the first time, Hatfield is up against a very different Liberal Party. For years, the Liberals were underfunded and disunited. But they've been revitalized by this man, Frank McKenna, a 39-year-old lawyer. He has an energetic image based on being straightforward. For instance, he's chosen to be disarmingly candid about what he can do about patronage.
I cannot make a commitment to eliminate it because it's not a commitment I know I can keep. Patronage is very much part of the fabric of life throughout Canada, and in poorer provinces such as ours particularly. And I simply cannot be hypocritical on that score and pretend that after an election I can clean up that system overnight. I know that I can't. I'm going to do the best I can.
Linda Dyer is a Fredericton pollster. She thinks she knows why all the polls say McKenna will win.
Perhaps they see in Frank McKenna the same thing they saw in Richard Hatfield 20 years ago. You know, here comes the dragon slayer in a way, and the young, new look, new image, new perspective on New Brunswick versus the 17-year leader.
Well, what have we got? What difference do we have if we change Liberals for Conservatives, Conservatives for Liberals? Very little in the substance.
It makes sense for George Little, leader of the NDP, to paint the Liberals and the Tories with the same brush. He has yet to win his own seat, and this is the first time they've had candidates in all ridings. So Little takes the tack that only the NDP are progressive. The Liberals are just the same old bunch.
There's a whole group of people who just can't wait to get to the trough, to elbow their way in. And that's the politics of the past. That's politics as usual that he's promising. And not, there's a basic kind of contradiction, it seems to me, in coming in promising change if change is going to mean things are exactly as the same as they were before.
But the leaders' debate showed there is one area where Hatfield and McKenna differ sharply. It's on the Meech Lake Accord. McKenna has said he wants to see if a better deal can be negotiated. He's concerned, he says, about women's rights.
Are you seriously suggesting that you would simply allow rights to be taken away if that was demonstrable?
They're not being taken away. They are not being taken away.
Well, there are many legal experts who say otherwise.
There are most legal experts say not, and the women of Quebec say not.
You can battle this as much as you want. The fact of the matter is there's a serious and a very real dispute in this country as to whether those rights are being taken away.
Started by people like yourself who don't want to deal with controversy.
I do not want to.
There was no sense that McKenna lost anything in this debate, or that Hatfield gained. It was certainly the liveliest he's been, but analysts say there's nothing he can do to win this election now. He's spending a lot of time in the French-speaking parts of the province, like this campaign party in Bactouche. The polls show he's much more popular among Acadians, but they don't judge him on the so-called lifestyle issues.
We're all here because we love you. We love the way you handle this province. We love your spirit of fairness.
It's an anomaly that this Protestant, English-speaking Tory became an Acadian champion. His protection of New Brunswick's Francophone rights and Canada's Constitution is probably his finest achievement. He will not speculate about what he'll do after the election. One insider says the few remaining Tories will be sitting in the House like birds on a rock, and they'll need Hatfield's help. But in a quarter of a century and 8 elections, he's always been a winner. The question arises, why is he subjecting himself to what the polls say is an almost certain defeat? When the Canadian tradition for long-standing premiers who think they might lose the next election is to bow out gracefully, to resign.
He would have been forced to resign because of the media, because of the publicity, because of the crisis. And I think that in the way he thinks, in the conversations that I've had with him, the ultimate way to go out of office is to be defeated. So I think if he loses, it's the most fitting end to his career, because it's an end that he's chosen.
And so as he travels across the province for one more time as its premier, on roads that he's paved and by the projects that he's built, there's one more image of Richard Hatfield that remains. And that's someone who doesn't give up.
I kept saying I'm not a quitter. I kept going through one campaign after another. I kept demonstrating that I was, in fact, leading this province, and leading this province very well. But still, the story was around me, like another persona. The story around me was that I was a loser, a quitter, or whatever. Not so.
For the Journal, I'm Leslie McKinnon.
Frank McKenna's triumph is a personal and political humiliation for Richard Hatfield. For almost 2 decades, he was a main player in the nation's great debates. At the same time, he had a verve and a style that was all his own. Jason Moskowitz looks back at a career that reached far beyond the borders of New Brunswick.
Federal provincial conferences became a national stage for Richard Hatfield. He was a provincial politician with a passion for the country. His passion ran deeper than his partisanship. A conservative, he supported Pierre Trudeau on the Constitution and on bilingualism. At home, he put up a stubborn fight. In spite of severe opposition, he made New Brunswick officially bilingual. He enhanced and encouraged the Acadian presence. With great pride, he walked into the Versailles Palace in France at the first ever Francophone summit. This English premier single-handedly got French New Brunswick to the summit table.
Le Nouveau-Brunswick est ici de collaborer et de contribuer.
Politically, Hatfield was undeniably and remarkably progressive. In 1976, he stood beside Flora MacDonald at the Tory Leadership Convention. He was the only Conservative First Minister to support the only woman candidate. At every conference on Aboriginal rights, he took a leading role in support of Native demands. He lamented the last failure to reach an agreement.
Something more and something better is going to come out of this. It's not a question of it's got to, it's going to.
Hatfield was the dean of the provincial premiers, the last of a generation. But there was never any doubt Richard Hatfield was very different. What other premier would go on national television in a sweaty T-shirt, regardless of the circumstances?
I have voted, that's all I will say.
A secret ballot.
Yes. It will be published 25 years after I'm dead.
And what other premier would have said this to the Princess of Wales?
We have heard and read the lies. Today, it was wonderful to meet and know the truth.
I'll make no comments.
You won't be stepping aside then. You'll be staying on as premier?
I won't be making any comments.
His last years were a well-chronicled tale of turmoil. He was acquitted on a marijuana possession charge, but the flamboyant lifestyle question persisted in an agonizing way. Despite it all, there was no way Richard Hatfield would call it quits.
I love politics. I love New Brunswick. I love the people of New Brunswick.
He was humiliated, not just defeated, but scorned by voters who had given him 4 consecutive victories as premier. Above all, nationally, he'll be remembered as a politician who stood and spoke for what he believed in. He'll also be remembered as a free spirit, a different kind of premier. Jason Moskowitz, CBC News, Ottawa.
Tonight, to no one's surprise, the Conservative Party of New Brunswick announced that Richard Hatfield had resigned as its leader.